Folks, thanks so much for tuning in again today. Have we got news for you and the headlines and what's going on behind those scenes? Appreciate the ongoing following here. Everything today will give you the Iranian update, what it means to you. We'll talk about some pretty amazing things going on around the world and end up with what the kids and the grandkids are up to. So stay tuned. Iran, I just want to start a little bit different today on the podcast here. Not a moment of silence, though I think we should have a moment of silence, but on a very sad note, in Iran, a 19-year-old wrestling champion who had the nerve to make some very mild comments about the vicious regime, the Islamist radicals that slaughter and kill everybody in sight. It's up to over 50,000 now that they've murdered in the streets with very little outcry from mainstream media. This young guy's name is Saleh Mohammadi, and he spoke up actually quite respectfully against the regime. He was hanged yesterday, and there was warning about this that was going to happen. A number of countries, not Canada unfortunately, but a number of countries were saying do not do this, and they hanged him. Keep in mind, folks, that is who the regime is. This is the intent that they have, not just for all Jews, as we say this, not just for all Americans, but for Christians. They hate everything to do with peace. They love death. It is a vicious death cult that we're talking about. And even though we should be mourning tens of thousands that have been slaughtered, this particular case kind of epitomizes the viciousness of that regime. So we're thinking of Saleh Mohammadi and his families tonight. And there are, or this morning, whenever you're listening, you know, there's been a call to the International Olympic Committee, which actually was asked to speak up before this happened, and they didn't. Again, why people are afraid of speaking up against psychopathic, extremist Islamic radicals, I don't know, other than it's fear of death, I guess. Anyway, they are now saying, okay, well, they're going to ban Iran from taking part in the Olympics. I have to say, I have mixed feelings about that, because when you ban a country, you're banning the athletes, usually young athletes who are just wanting to do the best in their lives, and they've been training for years. I kind of have mixed feelings on that. I wish the Olympic Committee had been more strong in speaking up before this young man was hanged. Well, I also hope that Tucker Carlson, and you remember last day or two I've been talking about Joe Kent, the high-ranking Trump operative who has come out against the war, and of course he's making lots of money now being able to go and talk on all the radical talk shows and other places that are also against the war, and that's fine, that's up to him. But I wonder how they're feeling today about the regime that they don't want to be too tough on, that has hanged this young wrestler. Pete Hegseth, the head of defense in the U.S., had an interesting comment, because he was saying, okay, we have decided we are going to share the ocean with Iran. We're going to share the ocean with Iran. That caused everybody in the news conference to kind of pause and raise their eyebrows and say, what? This is a new development, share the oceans with Iran. He said, yes, we're going to give them the bottom half of the ocean. So kind of a little warning there. Well, it's been very interesting. This is really could have headed the broadcast today. Much has been made in the media over the last few days that nobody seems to, no other country seems to want to help the U.S. in terms of protecting the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's energy flows through. And now we have the UK, we have Japan, we have Germany, there is Italy, the Netherlands, France, all saying they are going to do what they can to support protection of the Strait of Hormuz. Not nearly as much media attention to that announcement as the last few days, when it appeared like the President Trump was not going to be getting support. Canada, still quiet on that. We'd kind of like to see Canada came out, Prime Minister Carney came out with a bold announcement that there's no way that in any way, shape, or form we're going to be doing anything against Iran. So I wonder now, because he's traveling the world, he's meeting with the allies, I wonder if he will join now. Please, Prime Minister Carney, join with our allies and say that we will take part in protecting the world by finding ways to protect the Strait of Hormuz. Doesn't mean we have to send soldiers, doesn't mean we have to start bombing people, but just to be there. Because what happens in Iran, where they, of course, have shut down the internet, what they do is they show the statements of people like Joe Kent and Tucker Carlson. They show the statements of people like Prime Minister Carney. They show them all around to their thousands and their millions of citizens, and they say, see, we're winning the war. You see, all these countries are opposed to the U.S. So when we make those kind of statements, they are used by the killers, the vicious regime in Iran, and it really does discourage people who would want to rise up and be free. Something to think about. Brent has the cost of Brent, the price of Brent, we said at one point could hit as high as 150, and I pulled back from that saying, no, it looks like it's not rocketing through the roof. It was hovering around $100 a barrel, dropped down to as low as $93 yesterday. And with one of the major oil refineries being hit now in the Middle East, it's come up to 107. So it's moving up nowhere near the disastrous end of the world projections that have been thought. The U.S. Federal Reserve, they're holding off now. They were looking, and businesses and banks around the world were looking for them to possibly lower the interest rate. But of course, with the war going on and all the uncertainty, they're kind of holding steady. On the stock market, Apple stocks are down slightly. Tesla is also down. Even Nvidia down, only about 2%, but they're still down. That's about $2.17. That's about 1.2% down. So stocks are going to move around. They're not dropping drastically, but they are. Of course, it's uncertainty, so some of these are moving down. Interesting when we're talking about oil and movement of oil. We haven't heard from our dear friend Greta Thunberg yesterday, or in the last few days, as you know, the girl with a cause. And always loved by mainstream media. So Greta, as you know, has continued even as recently as last year to say, stop all oil everywhere. Stop. We are threatening the earth. We are threatening the earth, and saying the earth will die, and she wants all energy products shut in. And yesterday she was out saying, this is mean that Cuba doesn't have oil, and she's demanding that the U.S. give lots of oil to Cuba. So I guess if you're a communist country, you're going to have Greta as your poster girl. If you're not a communist country, then not so much. And we'll keep watching developments there. Well, lots of attention yesterday all around the world as the leader of the official opposition in Canada, Poilievre, appeared on and was on the Joe Rogan show. And even the left is sort of saying he gave a very strong and very clear-headed strategical approach to how we deal with the U.S. And he was not taking the Prime Minister Carney model, saying that Prime Minister Carney, of course, has suggested we should just put our elbows up and run to other countries like China. And Poilievre was saying no, and presented a very hard-nosed, hard-headed strategy on how we can actually make some gains in trading with the U.S., get things back on track. And he was a bit critical of the rush to impose a closer relationship with China when we've got this gigantic trading partner right by our side. So interesting to watch that. Some of the criticism that I thought was interesting from some media saying, why is he going and talking to somebody in U.S. media? Keep in mind that our own Prime Minister Carney, when people were wondering if he was going to run for election as leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, he made that announcement. Don't forget this on John Stewart's show, on the Daily Show, which is folks, a U.S. network and audience. So I guess it's okay depending who you are if you want to be on U.S. networks. Well, also interesting. That he spoke Pierre Poilievre spoke just the day before at a large business audience in Toronto, and it was a great strategic approach and didn't get a whole lot of coverage. He gave basically the same approach when he went to the US, and that got tons of coverage, even tons of coverage in Canada. So here we have Canadian media saying we shouldn't pay any attention to the US, but they're all eyes and they're all ears on what's happening in the US all the time. So I guess it's okay for us to be also. Premier Ford, talking about all eyes, has raised eyebrows because yesterday, in relation to a shooting that took place in Toronto where armed intruders, and it said in the news account, several of them burst into a home. The person in that home had a registered firearm, and it was locked properly as it should have been. And he actually was able to scare off the intruders. He shot one of them. And the intruders, always being good friends among themselves, dumped the poor guy off, threw him in the car, dumped him off at a hospital, and roared off into the night. And media saying to Premier Ford, well, what do you think? Wasn't this terrible that this man took action to protect his own home? Premier Ford saying, good for him, should have shot him a couple more times. And really saying what most Canadians believe, that we should be able to protect our homes as necessary. You know, coming out of that, there was an interesting thing. Chris Selly, writing over at the National Post, has an interesting column out today saying we should consider live streaming courtroom cases and live streaming the judges when they are making certain announcements and pronouncements, and that it may inform, it's not to threaten or intimidate the judges, but to keep Canadians informed in terms of just how far away from the Constitution itself so many judges are. And so interesting suggestion there. You might have seen now something we talked about here yesterday and the day before, a Chilliwack school trustee stepping down and taking on the school boards and the Department of Education in BC about their radical gender alteration policy and not letting parents know what's happening to their kids. So we talked about that, we headlined that, and it's now being headlined in mainstream media today. So just to know, when you're listening and watching to day-to-day news, you are very often, and what I try to do, giving you some of the news first. You're hearing it first here. Well, last night I flew into Edmonton and attended the annual fundraising dinner for Premier Danielle Smith. You know, she talked about, by the way, it was a packed out place. They're also having record fundraising through the year, the Conservatives in the province of Alberta. And we know that she has had clear policies, the only premier so far in the country on the gender issue, saying that yes, adults certainly have the right to alter themselves as they wish, but in Alberta, if you're under 19, you can't get your gender surgically alterated or get yourself chemically alterated or chemically castrated, and you have to wait till you're an adult. She also spoke out very clearly about legislation they've just tabled against a federal piece of legislation regarding MAID. That's we've sometimes called doctor-assisted suicide, and Canada leading the world in terms of how we kill off old people. And we warned and predicted that legislation would lead younger and younger people requesting and actually getting the right to be exterminated, and even for emotional reasons. So she and her government have tabled legislation that, as far as possible, puts some real curbs and real restraints on this massive runaway move by so many physicians across the country to exterminate mainly old people. But there are some guidelines and guardrails being put around it. So just a word to political parties across the country. Her government has taken on these issues, along with many other, of course, but on the gender issue and on the assisted death issue, taking those on and doing very well in the polls. These are what are called 80-20 issues, where 80% of the population basically agree. Politicians are the only ones who seem to be, in many cases, not all, there's some notable exceptions, terrified of being called mean, nasty, hateful, or phobic by the media. Elected people, listen to the people you represent. Well, in British Columbia, which has been one of the most vociferous in terms of their government's comments against anything U.S., we're not going to have anything to do with the U.S., And because the healthcare system is so terrible in Canada, because we're the only healthcare system in the democratic world that does not allow more choice in healthcare, which would bring down costs and reduce lineups, we're the only ones who stubbornly, again, out of fear of the media, hang to a system that is guaranteed to produce long lineups and not great results all the time, though we have great doctors and practitioners in the system. And so the BC Socialist government has now brought in and hired over 400 U.S. nurses from the United States coming to help out Canada. And so I guess we don't have anything to do with the U.S. until it's something that is actually going to affect us. A little bit of a divergence here. I just wanted to jump in on something that King Charles just made a comment on, actually had a news conference on, and he held up the country of Nigeria as a glowing example of a place where people get along beautifully, different religions and different beliefs. And most of the world is in shock and wondering who is briefing the king. Listen, I'm a monarchist. I'm supportive of the king and some of our constitutional history there. But who is briefing him? We know what is happening with radical Islamic slaughter by the Islamists of Christians and others. It's just, it's legendary in terms of the grotesque numbers, the rapes, the beheadings, the burning down of homes and churches. And he held that up as an example of how people should get along. So could somebody please get the proper briefing notes to the king? And I say, God save the king. In talk about wanting to be saved and protected, as we've warned, members of the IRGC, that's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, have been managing either to sneak out of Iran, or they're actually posted in a number of countries where they continue to direct death and suicides. And in Hezbollah, which is funded in Lebanon, and it's funded by Iran. And daily, right at the border, they are firing missiles onto innocent civilians in towns and hospitals. They target hospitals, they target schools, they target innocent people, even as Iran is doing right now, indiscriminately just firing their missiles everywhere. War is terrible, and there are times when there is collateral damage and innocent citizens are unfortunately killed. But remember, Iran is distinguished herself by deliberately, constantly, and almost only targeting civilians. Anyway, 4 leading members of the IRGC who are giving orders and commands in South Lebanon, they know as they watch the leaders in Iran, just the amazing intelligence. I don't know how the intelligence forces do this and being able to take out these Iranian leaders. So these 4 were checking into a hotel, and they knew they could be targets. So they had their people register 15 names, 15 rooms under 15 different names. And then the 4 of them sneaked into one room thinking they'd be safe for the night. And very late at the night, guess what? An Israeli rocket somehow found its way into that hotel room, blew them into eternity where they will be spending time with Hitler. Nobody else at the hotel was hurt or injured. I don't know if that's going to hurt the travel points for the IRGC or if they can make a claim on the room being canceled, but it's really stunning. If you're an Iranian activist militarily, your life is definitely on the line. Well, the U.S. In the U.S., we're seeing some interesting little development. There's this young guy, just a kid really, but I'll say he's in his 20s, who's getting a lot of attention because he's like a one-man documentary mission on getting out, discovering billions of dollars worth of fraud in social programming. He exposed a lot of it in Minnesota. He's gone down to Los Angeles now, and he's making quite a name for himself. Going to daycares where there's no adults, going to daycares that are getting millions and millions of dollars where there's not even any kids, and it's making the governor furious. So rather than Governor Newsom addressing the problem, they had somebody do a meme of the guy